Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Peter Llewellyn, and I run the services at medcommsnetworking.com. So, information, resources, services, and so on for people who work across the globe in and around medical education, medical communications, medical publishing, and so on, and the associated businesses. A particular shout out to those of you who might want to get into the business. We've got a lot of information at firstmedcommsjob.com for you. We do a lot of these webinars, and you'll find hundreds now of videos over at NetworkPharma TV, not just the webinar recordings, but other sorts of video content as well. So there's a lot of content if you're interested in working, or you are working in and around medcoms anywhere across the globe. The freelancers are an important part of our community, and it's been an interesting 18 months or so for freelancers. And today we're going to, I'm delighted we've got Ellie, we've got Adriana talking to us about the current landscape across the world for freelancing, I guess focused on medical writing, aren't we? But the truth is, we'll be talking about a lot of issues which will be relevant to anybody freelancing in and around this business. So, presentation and Q&A. Very keen to get the audience today. We've got a good international audience. Please do share your thoughts and your comments, your experiences. Tell us where you're from, ask your questions, and we'll have a lively discussion. So, on that note, Ellie, I'm going to hand over to you. Thanks very much.
Sure. Thank you very much, Peter. So hello, everybody. I am Eleanor Steele, and I work as the MedComms mentor, providing specialist training and mentoring to medical writers. But I'm here today in a slightly different capacity. You can connect with me on LinkedIn here, but I have recently taken over the MedComms Workbook, a specialist subscription service for freelancers in medcoms from Peter, who founded it. And so you can find out a little bit more about the MedComms Workbook here. But this is why I am collaborating with Adriana and also Laura Kehoe around what the current picture is like for freelancers in medcoms. And we are exploring this topic today in preparation for writing an article which will be published later in the year. And we are very excited to hear what you think, but we've got some thoughts as well. So, Adriana, over to you.
Thank you, Eleanor. I'm Adriana Rocha. I'm from Portugal, and I'm a freelance medical writer and editor. And like Eleanor, today I am here in a different capacity. I'm the chair of the Freelance Business Group from the European Medical Writers Association, or EMWA. And like Eleanor said, we're writing this article in conjunction with Laura Kehoe. And we want to tell you a little bit what our preliminary research has shown. And we're very keen to hear about what are your current challenges and struggles, and also have an idea how can we move forward in what Peter has been saying over the year, interesting times. So I'm putting on in the chat as well, where you can find me on LinkedIn. So, Eleanor, please move the next one. So one of the main things that we were encouraging today is to hear from you. We would be very happy if when you answer, and if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, please put your country when you pop it into the chat. This is because we are seeing a very global trend, but some very interesting national trends as well. So if you could pop that in and we could discuss later on, that'd be great. Thank you. So moving on, I'm going to give you a very small introduction to what has been happening since 2020. Again, very small. This would probably warrant its own webinar. Maybe something for Peter later on, I don't know. But 2020 has changed a lot in the pharma industry, in the world in general, and that has been kickstarted with the COVID pandemic. Eleanor? So the COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic by the World Health Organization in March 2020. And immediately there were two specific trends. The obvious first one was everything shifted from any clinical trials, therapies, etc., towards COVID-19 related therapies in order to make the vaccines, the medications, medical devices, PPE, so on and so forth. At the same time, because of the severity of COVID, we all went into lockdown. This meant we could no longer be working with our colleagues in the office, and the virtual workforce had to happen. I'm sure nobody heard of Zoom before 2020, and now it's our daily bread. So what happened happened instantly as well, relevant for us in medical writing, was there was a huge demand for people who were both used to remote working and would easily integrate a virtual workforce and virtual teams. Also, people who were knowledgeable about these specific things about healthcare and policy and COVID-19. So one of the major things that companies had to do is to kickstart and advance digitalization. This digitalization, which culminated 18 months ago with AI as well, also created other long-term effects. Yeah, the most obvious one is if you put all your eggs in the COVID-19 basket, what is happening to the other clinical trials? Clinical trials had to slow down. Many had to stop because lockdown. So there was a global delay in the industry. Also, at the end of 2022, we simultaneously saw the advent of AI, but we also saw an increase geopolitical problems happening that are affecting us to this day. And moving on to 2023, this is still ongoing. We currently still have inflation. We currently still have political instability. 2024 has been, I hate to repeat myself, but again, interesting year in terms of elections. So we have needed to adapt in that regard. Also, COVID was downgraded from a global health problem by WHO in May 2023. This meant, okay, let's try to even out. There is still COVID-19 because, again, pandemics will happen in the future. We have learned many things. We should carry on doing that. But we also need to catch up with everything else that people have been delayed. The major impact that people have been seeing, and we've been very careful in consulting market reports and forecasts. For anyone watching this video later on, this is current data from July 2024. So please take everything I'm saying with that knowledge. So the major effect people have been seeing is there were a lot of biotech companies, especially smaller biotech companies, that popped up with the sole interest in doing COVID-related work, again, PPE, medication, so on and so forth. The minute that COVID-19 is no longer the major concern, the investment in those companies will stop. And this is why people start murmuring, okay, there's massive layoffs in biotech, and this is indeed happening. At the same time, we are seeing major restructuring in pharma. I'm careful to use the word restructuring and not layoff because it is a combination. So the global picture is, as always, very complex. There's been an advance in digitalization. Some tasks have been automated. Some tasks are new and need support. I'm going to be talking a bit more about that later. But overall, it seems there is a combination of layoffs with restructuring, because at the same time we are seeing reports of pharma and layoffs, we're also seeing restructuring reports and merger and acquisitions happening with major pharma companies. Now, let's go back to AI. AI is here to stay, whether we want to or not. It is both the good and the bad. But one major thing, and I think we can all agree the pandemic seriously highlighted this, is the need to combat disinformation. And this was particularly clear during COVID-19 pandemic. And AI, as much advances as it has been making, it's still prone to hallucinations. And every output coming out of AI should not be taken at face value. Everything should be fact-checked by a person. And there is no one more qualified to fact-check medical and scientific data than a medical writer. So there is still a high demand for fact-checking, for medical journalism, and for accurate medical and scientific data. Another interesting trend that I personally found surprising is the need for virtual healthcare. So during lockdown, we couldn't physically go to the doctor. Again, Many of us probably went to see our physician via Zoom, which was an interesting experience. But there's now also a shift. We also see this in terms of apps, for instance, in the neuroscience field, something to monitor the patients, like a sensor or something. This means that this app, for instance, will have to have a language that could clarify to a patient what the patient needs to know, but also needs to explain to the healthcare professional what he needs to know. These are different toolboxes, and these are different skills coming again from medical writers. And finally, I would just like to point this interesting fact. There is also some surprises that are not in this trend of forecast, and we are finding unmet needs. The major example we found was Ozempic, the commercial name for semaglutide, that was marketed as a type 2 diabetes drug, but is now seeing a second life as a weight loss drug. And according to the last Goldman and Sachs forecast, they predict $100 billion global market by 2030. So that is something maybe to look into later on. But again, these are global trends. How has this impacted particularly freelance medical writers? I'll pass on to Eleanor for that.
Super, thank you, Adriana. So I think the general feeling is that it's a very mixed picture. I think that's always been the case to a certain extent, and MedComms has always had peaks and troughs, partially sort of seasonally, partially around different types of work that people are doing. But these have seemed exaggerated in comparison with what we have seen in previous years. So Peter ran a survey in January 2024, and the responses in that survey were very interesting. So few freelancers actually reported that they were reducing their rates, but a lot of people said that their 2023 income was lower than they had expected, despite keeping their rates steady. And there was quite a lot of concern around income stability. I've had a lot of conversations with freelancers, as well as looking at these survey results in detail. And there are some people who have said they are as busy as ever, but even they have acknowledged that they are turning down less work than they previously had. And a lot of people have reported feast or famine type experiences, where sometimes they have more work than they know what to do with, and other times there's just nothing coming through, which again contrasts with much more stable and predictable workloads that people were experiencing previously. Other people have said that they have been booked by an agency for a specific time period or a specific set of projects, and then that work has just not materialized or has been significantly reduced from what they were anticipating, which can be really problematic, especially if they are turning down other work so that they would have capacity to do this. And this is, variable. It's not the same picture for everybody. And so talking to Laura about the picture in Europe, she said that her impression from the people that she had spoken to and survey results was that in Germany, fewer freelancers were feeling this effect, whereas in Switzerland, which you might think would be a very similar situation, was much more quiet. So there is a lot of variety out there. And we would be very interested to hear what you think. But in general, it seems as though the current economic climate has definitely slowed down the freelancing opportunities that are coming through. But there are some signs that as of July 2024, things are picking up again. So in our research for the article, we found a report that estimated that the global medical writing market value in 2022 was $3.8 billion. But it predicted that this would rise to $8.4 billion by 2030. And the biggest contributor to this rise was predicted to be regulatory writing, partially due to the record numbers of clinical trials that have been registered over the last 18 months or so, but that all sectors of medical writing are predicted to expand. Now, that is great, but we also need to think about what things are like for freelancers at the moment. And I think one of the things that is actually affecting how freelancers are experiencing their workloads is that the freelance population has been changing. So there was a recruitment boom in MedComms during COVID, but now agencies are not necessarily recruiting, especially more senior people who are more expensive because of financial constraints. And this is very different from how things were pre-COVID, when senior people often had their pick of jobs because there were more there was more need for senior people than there were people available to fill those positions. Whereas now, a lot of agencies are not recruiting, or they might be restructuring, or even making redundancies, which have also affected pharma companies as well. And this has led to some people beginning freelancing, including some of those more senior people. Agencies have also started pushing people back to the office in some cases, which isn't always practical or feasible for everybody who is actually working there. And that can lead to people deciding to become freelance as well. I think there has also been a bit of a shift in terms of when people decide to go freelance in their careers. So previously, I think pre-COVID, a lot of people would be pretty experienced before they decided to make that step into freelancing. And now I think we have more early careers freelancers. And this might be due to a shift in ways of working post-COVID, and also expectations of work and work-life balance and things like that. On the flip side, some freelancers have actually opted to return to employment. And some of those are very experienced people who've been freelancing for a very long time, but now want the security and stability of an employed contract. And there are others who are doing more kind of hybrid working. So they might have a part-time contract as an employee, but also have some freelance contracts. And sometimes that will be across different MedComms companies, and sometimes that will be in a different industry. So there are sort of, I think, more variations as to how freelancers are working and what stage of career they're at. That being said, there is a challenge that I think is pretty common across all freelancers, and that is around marketing. So prior to COVID, the market was booming and there was usually much more work than actually freelance capacity or capacity within agencies. During COVID, MedComms boomed and everybody was busy. I think that has obviously slowed down, but I think in terms of the marketing, a lot of people who had gone freelance before COVID had got a lot of experience under their belts. They may have had a long agency career working in several different places before they actually went freelance. And so they had a lot of good contacts, and that was all they needed for a sustainable business with income coming in, lots of projects, and possibly more work than they could actually handle. But this strategy may no longer be a reliable way of getting enough work. So with all of the changes that we have seen, people's contacts may be working at an agency that cannot use external support at the moment, or they might be restructuring. There might be another reason for freelancer freezes. They might have been made redundant. They might have gone freelance themselves. They might have retired. And so those experienced freelancers who have never really needed to do any marketing up till now are suddenly finding that the places that they used to get work are no longer available to them. And so they need to make that step. For the people who go freelance at an earlier career stage, maybe from medical writer positions or senior writer even, they may not have had any business development experience within those roles, because that sort of work is often handled by people who are more senior. And also they have had a shorter time to build up their network of contacts within MedComms, and so are going to be less able to rely on that network for easy work that will just sort of fall in their laps, kind of thing. So it's hard to put together marketing and business development activities if you don't have that kind of experience or haven't really been able to hone those skills because you haven't needed to. And it can be very daunting to get started, especially if you just want to do the writing or the account management and project management that you set up your business to do. Marketing can be a real problem, and this frequently comes up as a real challenge in conversations that I've had with freelancers. So how can freelancers navigate this challenging landscape? The first tip that Adriana and I want to share is that it's a really good idea to use quiet times productively, which means that you're much less likely to panic when they happen. So Q1 in any year is likely to be quite quiet for freelancers in general because pharma companies haven't sorted out their budgets yet, so agencies are less likely to want to take on external resource. Ring fencing some time and maybe some budget for doing learning and development activities is a really good way of using that quiet time productively. And it can help you broaden your skills or hone current skills. So thinking about things like new types of project that you might be able to work on, making sure that your visualization skills are excellent, because I think a lot more projects are needing that visual aspect. And maybe looking at AI. How can you use that in a robust and compliant way to streamline your processes or to offer extra things in the way that you're working? Thinking also about the marketing and business development aspects. This could be some time to put aside to looking at your network, thinking about the clients that you have worked with previously and other potential clients that could be a great place for you to work. So maybe that could be broadening out to clients who are working in pharma, in-house, rather than just agencies, or just making some plans so that you can build authentic and sustainable marketing strategies that are right for you. So marketing can seem really scary or awkward, but if that's how it feels, then that type of marketing is not right for you and for your business. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think the biggest advice that I can give is that talking to people is just a great start. And that can be regular check-ins with your current clients or previous clients, letting them know about your availability, and also talking about additional services or projects that you could work on, because that particular client might see you as the manuscript person and have no idea that you would also be able to help with the ad board that they've got coming up until you start talking about the other things that you can do for them. Or maybe they've got a colleague who needs some help and they just haven't connected the dots yet. So that can be a really fantastic way of making sure that you've got more work coming in down the line. And making contact with previous colleagues, previous clients, other connections throughout the industry is a fantastic way of starting marketing in a really sustainable and authentic way. And I'd also recommend keeping track of who you talk to and when you've had those conversations, so that you can make sure that you check in regularly, because it's very easy for a year or two to pass before you've spoken to somebody again, and that might mean you've missed out on opportunities with them. I would also recommend talking to people outside of your kind of work circle. So recently I've been talking to a couple of parents of my daughter's classmates and discovered that weirdly they work in related industries. And so we've started talking about potential collaborations on a couple of projects. And you wouldn't kind of think that the playground of a primary school in South London would be a great place for business development in MedComms, but here we are. It turns out that it can be. I've also talked to other freelancers in the MedComms Workbook who've had similar experiences. Somebody was saying they've got a project from a conversation that just started in a pub. Somebody else was talking about work that they'd got from one of their partner's friends, and it had never occurred to them when they started those conversations that work might actually come out of them. But it can happen. So talking about what you do with people and seeing where those conversations go will be really, really useful potentially. You can also have conversations in support and networking communities, because as freelancers, we can be very isolated. We don't have the company around us, as we may have done in our agency days, where there are colleagues, where there's training, where there's support when things are tough. And yes, I am potentially a little biased, but I think the MedComms Workbook is a fantastic community that you can join. And we have a community platform with 250 something members at the moment. And we have a private place where we can talk about all things freelancing. We have regular events where we get together and talk about different topics, often with a guest speaker. So we've had things like IT for freelancers, finance for freelancers, marketing is a regular topic of conversation, and other things that are really useful and relevant. And we have recordings of those along with other resources that you can go and look at any time. And I am going to pop a quick link in the chat so that you can find out more. And if you're watching the recording, I will do the same in the comments underneath so that you can find out more. But please, if you have any questions, get in touch with me at any time, because I am very happy to help, and it would be lovely to welcome you into the community. And I'm now going to pass back to Adriana to talk a little bit about the EMWA Freelance Business Group.
Yes, and I would like to ask Eleanor to pop that link in the chat while I talk a little bit about it. I'm the chair of the Freelance Business Group, which is from the European Medical Writers Association. This is a professional organization. We organize something called the Freelance Business Forum at the EMWA conferences. So there's one in person in May, it happened now in Valencia, and one virtual now in November. And our main concern is really, like Eleanor in MedComms Workbook, is having a community and talking to people, because you cannot really be a freelancer alone. You can, but you know what I mean. And also, Eleanor, if you could pop the next one, please. Next one. Here you go. So this is a QR code. The link Eleanor is also sharing at the moment in the chat. So this is a link about a list of communities that Peter originally collated in the MedComms Workbook website. And this ranges all things that can be a support networking community. So it can range from professional organizations like EMWA, and the Australasian. It can also range from the smaller national ones, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the most recent Italian Medical Writers Association, the local EMWA group in Poland. Then you also have the local networking groups that can meet informally. You will find them throughout Europe. Some of these groups charge a fee, some of them are free. One very nice example we had recently last month during MedComms Day in June 12th were a few communities based in the UK who had informal get-togethers where they got to have a lunch together, have a chat, and so on. These communities are important and are essential for you as a freelancer, not only for the obvious support and learning opportunities, not only for the logical resilience and mental health, but also the main part, and this is something that Eleanor mentioned a little bit, but I will follow on, is the major part of your work will come through talking to your colleagues and having a feel. So for instance, you made connections with your network, a colleague of yours saying, I'm looking for something in therapeutic area A. A client comes to you and you say, look, I don't work for that area, but I can recommend a colleague who will be a very good person to work for that. So there is this need to be there as a community to also face these more difficult times now, but honestly, throughout. Again, you need a support network to be able to grow and thrive as a freelancer. And with that, hopefully you can check the links later. You can talk to people later. You can also talk to me and Eleanor. I will just like to give you, next slide, final reminder that we are doing this presentation to highlight what the issues are, but also to gather what your suggestions and comments. We are open to training. We already saw some of them that we will be answering once I finish speaking. But again, we're also keen to delivering solutions. Hopefully, the last 10 minutes of Eleanor and I speaking have helped in some way for you to maybe change your strategy and think long term about your freelance business, which is a business, remember, marketing long term, but also to network with your colleagues. In the end, I remind you that this is an article I'm writing with Eleanor and Laura Kehoe. This will be published in December in the Medical Writing Journal of EMWA, titled The Worldwide Challenges Affecting Freelance Medical Writing. And now we would very happily like to hear from you and your questions and comments, and let's go.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing there so that we can see each other a bit better. I think looking through the comments and things that have come in while we've been talking, there was one that caught my eye in particular, it was about Brexit. So thinking about the effect that Brexit may have had on the freelance situation. Now, I think it's a tricky one given the timing and how it has overlapped with a lot of the changes that were happening through COVID. But I know from experience of working with a few different agencies that it is harder for UK-based agencies to work with people who are outside of the UK. And there are definitely some agencies that will only work with freelancers who are based in the UK. It's not the case across the board, but I think there definitely have been effects. It's a tricky one because I think that was the case before Brexit as well with some agencies because of differences in how they're set up. But I think there definitely have been some effects there. Is that something that you have heard from other European freelancers, Adriana?
I mean, I can speak from my own experience as well. I remember being completely baffled in my first months as a freelancer, being on the phone to a recruiter and asking me about IR35 and requirements. And I have no idea what IR35 is.
Yeah.
And then finally jumping into it and overall really having this idea that UK-based agencies are not that keen. This is my direct experience. I would like to be complemented by other people who might be in the EU, who might contribute more. Yeah, so Maria David is saying that the IR35 tax laws have not helped the freelance market. Yes, and you are based in the UK as well. So I was talking about examples outside the UK, but it seems to be something across the board. But the UK experience, I will refer to you and maybe Peter to talk more about that.
You probably should just sort of clarify the IR35 rules are UK tax rules for people that are self-employed, particularly the changes that happened a couple of years ago apply to single director limited companies. So it's disrupted the marketplace in terms of causing problems for some clients working with freelancers in terms of who charges the tax, who pays the tax, and so on. There's been quite a lot of disruption there. Similar sorts of rules have appeared in other parts of the world, but IR35 is a UK specific tax rule.
Yeah, I think part of the issue around IR35 is that different agencies have very different interpretations of what those rules mean and have got very different policies in terms of how they will work with freelancers. Some sort of say that you have to work within IR35 if you're doing any kind of freelance work. Others say you have to work outside of IR35, and the ways that they handle both of those situations can be very different, which can make it very confusing, can make it tricky to navigate the contractual discussions for freelancers. And that can kind of put a big barrier between somebody who is able to do the work that the agency needs, but actually kind of getting through to the point where they're allowed to get started can be really tricky. And sometimes I think it means that you can't actually get started and sort of miss the opportunity because it's just so complicated. That's something that I've heard about happening. So it's definitely had an effect. Yeah.
Yeah, we had
just jumping just jumping in slightly on that point. I just think there's a nuance to that. I mean, in the last few years, there's been a lot more contractual type activity. You know, we're way beyond the days when I used to pick up the phone to a freelancer and go, "Do you want to do a bit of work?" sort of thing. You know, and it's been increasing over the last few years. IR35 is a part of it, but there's a lot of other reasons why clients of whatever sort, and indeed the freelancers, have become much more orientated around contracts, some of which are really quite wieldy documents. And that clogs things up, I think. I mean, I like the old ways in which freelancers used to work, you know, with a little bit of trust and a little bit of informality, and we can crack on with some work. So that's a difference in the way that work happens now, which I think clogs things up and slows things down. And I think if you're coming into freelancing without thinking about that, or having experienced it, maybe if you haven't worked in an agency working with freelancers, it can be a real surprise as a new freelancer, the degree of paperwork and contractual type activity that's necessary to grapple with. But also just a nuance on the IR35 type conversation that you were starting to have. I mean, it's always intrigued me how somebody in the UK, despite the fact they can work with anybody anywhere in the world, likes working with somebody in the UK, or in the US, we want to work with somebody in the US. And it's sometimes there's good reasons for it, but sometimes it's just, well, I work here and I want to talk to somebody in my own office hours, and it's just easier. And you don't think beyond that. There's obviously the other extreme, which is that I can sit here in the UK and work with someone in New Zealand, and I can be asleep while they're doing the work, and we can share. And so, but it always intrigues me how many client types actually do just prefer to work with people in their own locality, but that's not to dismiss the complexities that can happen, whether it's financially, you know, the arrangements for paying people in different currencies and also. But a lot of people just say, well, I'm in the UK and I want to work with someone in the UK. I think in the global sort of community and working practice that happen these days, I think there's an interesting conflict in there, which maybe we'll just iron out. But I think we still forget how many people just like to work with people who they can relate a little bit more to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I would like just to share this comment from Alison Humphreys. She is suggesting IPSE in the UK as a useful organization who gives useful advice on IR35. Somebody will have to clarify what IPSE stands for, because I really don't know. Eleanor?
Yeah, I can pop a link in.
Yeah, I can't think fast enough, but it's a well-known organisation in the UK that's about independent contractors, basically, and they do provide a lot of useful services to people, including contract reviews and so on and so forth. And they actually came into existence in the UK because of the IR35 rules originally 20 years ago, and they've been championing better dealing with contractors.
You mentioned also a very good point, because again, many people focus on freelancing as I'm going to have an amazing life in terms of freedom and so on. But you need to remember that writing is going to be something you're going to be doing 50% of the time. I'm my own accountant, I'm my own lawyer, I'm my own. So for instance, I had to read and learn about a lot of different European laws because for instance, I draft my own contracts whenever possible. Sometimes clients come with their own, especially if they're bigger companies, but I want to make sure we're all in the same page, because especially once I realized, okay, UK has their way of doing things, especially now with IR35, Europe is uniform and it isn't, because again, one thing that might be standard in Germany might not be standard in Portugal. So there is that added burden that we need to know exactly how it works in terms of contracts. We need to know how it works in terms of tax, for instance. Again, going back to my first time I spoke with a UK recruiter, he was asking, why am I not an LLC? And I said, well, according to Portuguese law, there are very specific characteristics if I were to become an LLC. By Portuguese law, I have to be a sole trader and I'm classified as such. So again, and this was really difficult to transmit, because if people are used to cookie cutter and they're used to always the same sort of client, if they find something a bit strange, maybe their reaction is going to be, yeah, I'm just not.
Yeah, I think that's
experience, Eleanor.
Yeah, it's true. I think the variety of ways that people work can mean that it isn't what a client is expecting, and that can definitely be a barrier. I think it would also be useful to hear from anyone in the audience who has any insights or tips that they want to share with other freelancers. So obviously we shared a couple in the presentation, but we want to hear from you guys, because if there are things that you've done that have helped you navigate these challenges over the last few years, then that is going to be a really valuable part of the article that we're writing, but also a really nice way of helping other people. So, you know, I loved Alison's suggestion about getting in touch with IPSI and looking at their resources, because that can be very helpful when you're trying to figure things out for IR35 or contracting, or if you've got a client who has not paid their invoice on time, things like that. But are there other things that you have experienced or seen other people do or tried that have been a useful way of navigating some of the challenges that have been occurring? And again, you can kind of get in touch with us after the webinar today, or after you've watched the recording, so that you can pass on any of those insights. But
we're particularly interested also, because Eleanor was talking about that. What have you tried differently as a result of the past couple of years being more challenging? What have you tried differently, and has that worked out for you? Because again, we need to refresh our terms of marketing, our terms of approach, and we're very keen to know what has been working for you.
Yeah, so I've heard from a few people, and actually I've done it myself, working directly with pharma clients rather than through agencies. And I think this is partly around how quite a few pharma clients seem to be narrowing down the groups of agencies that they're working with, but that may well mean that some projects fall out of the scope of what those agencies can do. And it might also mean that they don't have the flexibility to adjust when things change. And so having freelancers that can pick up things that sort of fall between different agencies or need a more rapid turnaround, that might be somewhere that freelancers can really help. And that's something that other people have mentioned to me as well. We've also got some great advice from Kate, saying a good accountant is really helpful to look after all her tax and limited company requirements. And yeah, she makes the point that it's actually cheaper to pay the accountant than to spend the time herself. And that is a really nice way of looking at it, sort of thinking about the amount that you're paying somebody versus your hourly rate, and how much longer it's going to take you to figure out these things. If you're not an expert, it's actually possibly going to be a better return on your investment to pay somebody and outsource that rather than trying to do it yourself.
Not to mention that the minute you outsource that task, you have more free time on your own to focus on your own business and your writing and so on. So that's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And question from Catherine about pharma clients. Are these big pharma or smaller pharma biotech? And I think it's a bit of everything, really. Different companies do have different contracting processes and requirements and things. So there are some where it's very tricky to actually kind of work as a freelancer, but I think it's not necessarily impenetrable. So yeah, it's all about having those conversations, I think.
I think some of these practical questions about being a freelancer, it's worth making the point that and you've touched on it, the networking communities, however you do it, whether it's big groups, small groups, online groups, or sitting around a table at a pub or EMWAs or whatever. Really, really important that all freelancers and aspiring freelancers do grasp and understand how valuable those discussions are. And you've said, and I would say, and we all say, the mixed picture is a real thing. I talk to any number of freelancers who sit there and they're very, very confident that the world works like they experience it. If they've got lots of work, then obviously everyone's got lots of work. If they haven't got any work, then the whole world has collapsed. If they do talk to each other and you find there are different ways of going around things and there's different experiences, and that's what's so valuable about these sorts of conversations and the sorts of groups that you run and so on. So I really, really want to encourage people to go and talk to each other. We are a little bit over time, and I just wanted to finish on, to come back to the basic point of the worldwide landscape and the sort of work that you're doing and so on. I just wondered, we touched on it but skipped over it. A lot has changed in the last 18 months with AI, and we can have a whole webinar about AI. I just want to know what your gut feeling is. A lot of freelance writers come out of an agency or whatever. They've been trained, they're very confident about what they're doing. They start on a Monday morning, having been doing what they're doing on a Friday, and carrying on going. In the last 18 months, I just wonder what sense you get from the medical writers you talk to. The way that work is being done is changing so fast. Freelancers who weren't in an agency or a client even 12 months ago, very little experience of any of AI. People in agencies are now doing a lot of experimentation. Writers in agencies are learning a lot about using AI. Is there a gulf opening up between writers who've come out and maybe have been freelancing for 6 months, let alone longer? Do you see what I mean? And what are people doing to address that? Because I think there is a huge one, and it must be quite concerning for medical writers who have been freelancing for a little bit of time, not very much, to be seeing how fast things are changing. Do you see what I mean? And have you got any view on that?
Yeah. So from my experience of the agencies that I have been working with and supporting, there's a lot of experimentation around AI, but it's not actually translating into a change in processes at the moment. I think that may be variable. I am one person working with a discrete number of different companies, but I think that at this point, there isn't a massive gulf, and that there may well be some freelancers who are going to be better equipped because they've got more capacity to actually kind of do that experimentation and fewer constraints about what they're doing and how they're doing it than somebody who's working for an agency. I think it's probably variable, but I don't think there's a huge difference in terms of process yet.
And I would.
So what you're saying, sorry, just to clarify that, is and I can see the pros and cons on both sides of that. So within an agency, there's an experimentation going on. You've got support, you've got people to talk to. You're probably you're being paid to do some of this. As a freelancer, you don't have that support and that resource and that opportunity to experiment. However, you have the freedom to experiment if you can. And I see that as quite a gulf, actually. But I just wonder how much the freelance medical writers are experimenting. And if so, where are they experimenting and how are they experimenting? Because I can see it working in principle, but then I'd sit there and go, well, okay, I can do anything I want as a freelancer, but where do I go? Where do I find out what to do? Where do I experiment?
That's
no.
Well, I think it's something that people are talking about. We've had in the MedComms Workbook somebody who is experimenting with creating different AI tools, asking us for feedback on things that they've been putting together, and the response there has been incredibly positive. So I think there are some freelancers who are capitalizing on this as an opportunity that somebody working in an agency wouldn't be able to do. And I think for anybody experimenting with AI, you need to think about the things that you are interested in and use that, because there are so many different tools and there are so many different approaches that there can't be a kind of regimented way of doing it. And just leaning into the things that really spark your curiosity and creativity would be the only way to go.
Yeah, and I agree.
Adriana, what's your experience?
The being homogeneous about, because the same way that every freelance medical writer would look at AI in different ways, also, I don't think agencies are going about it homogeneously as well, because some agencies will probably be more cautious because they're doing very specific confidential data. So they're very careful about establishing guidelines, what can or cannot be done. Others probably not. So I don't think that gulf is clear cut. I still think it's too early to be able to say that. Maybe let's check back in 2025 and see how that goes. But I think for now, I will be hesitant to say what is happening and what is the actual difference.
Okay. We should draw this to a close because we are over time. So, but there's some fascinating insights into there. I think that anyone watching this hopefully is grasping it's a mixed picture out there. And the more we talk to each other and the more we understand, the better. But but everyone's an individual, and a lot of this comes down to how you handle it, and what you do, and the experience that you have in your particular area with your particular clients. And I would just finish by encouraging people, anyone watching this, to be contacting you guys, and about your communities, but also looking around at the other communities, finding a community that works for them, talking to each other. And I always say, if there's not one that suits you, set one up. It's easy. Do something online, or decide to invite some people to your. Exactly. It's just very, very easy to at least talk to people. You don't have to turn it into an association, although those opportunities are there if you want to. Okay, I'm going to draw a line to the conversation, the recording. We've got a couple of minutes left, so anybody watching this can hang around, and we'll carry on talking to the top of the hour. But huge thanks to both of you, Adriana and Eleanor, for sharing your insights. I know I can talk for you. You've said people can contact you via LinkedIn, and indeed at the moment you're very keen in terms of this article. For the sake of the video, perhaps we should just emphasize the article is hopefully coming out in December in Medical Writing. In a few months' time, you can go there and find out whether it's actually been published or not. But in the meantime, any discussion is good. If you want to talk to me about anything that I'm doing, MedComms and so on, I'm there. MedCommsNetworking.com is worth having a look at. But for today, I'd like to say a big thank you, and give us a little wave, and wish you all well to the rest of the day. Bye-bye.